Now, unless you wanna wait till the end, I mean.
No, sir, I'm on y'all's schedule. I'm here till 5 o'clock. I know y'all don't want to be, but.
You'll be here by yourself.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioners, for allowing me the opportunity to come before you today. I wanted to take just a little bit of your time and really talk to you about EMS, the structure of EMS, to kind of educate you and get you up to speed on how we operate, why we operate the way we do, and just as importantly, where we came from, because I think that's very important. I had the opportunity, and I know other department heads did as well, but to have a sit-down visit with Commissioner O'Neill here about 3 months ago now, I guess. And it was a really good visit. I was very appreciative of that opportunity for Mr. Commissioner O'Neill to come and sit with us, and I hope it was very informative for both he and I. So I was very thankful for that. So really just want to start at the very beginning, because I know, you know, there's definitely some new faces on the board, and truth of the matter is you just may not know, and you don't know what you don't know, right? So my job is to kind of bring all this out to you so that you have a good understanding of your emergency services. So if you're old enough to remember, we originated and started right on Main Street in Longburg, way before my time. Okay, right where Bojangles sits today used to be where EMS was established, and we, Scotland County EMS, actually originated in the mid to late 70s. That's when we first hit the ground running. In the mid 80s, they transitioned from Main Street to our current location on West Boulevard beside the EOC. Ms. Tork, if you can slide that up a little bit there, that'll help. If we can. If not, I'll try to go off the memory of that. But in the 90s, and I'm going to reference back to the 90s because I got into EMS and actually went full time in 1996. So I'm going to let that be my beginning time frame to really educate you and show you where we were and where we have been and where we are today. So in the 90s, EMS was averaging around 4,000 calls annually. Okay. And along with that, we were doing everything. Okay, we were handling all of the 911 calls. We were also doing all the convalescent transports inside the county. So doctor's appointments, dialysis patients, we were taking them to and from home for their dialysis patients, as well as we were doing the vast majority of the inter-facility transports for Scotland Memorial. So if they had patients, OB patients that were admitted up on the floor that had to be taken to Cape Fear Valley because that was the hospital of choice back then, we were the primary agency that did those transports. We would take patients to rehab centers down in Florence, in Moore County, in Fayetteville, and others. And then we would also transport critical patients from the ER to the level 1 trauma centers, i.e. Duke, Chapel Hill. So we did that for many years, and the structure of EMS during that time, we ran 3 shifts with 2 ambulances per shift and a dispatcher, okay? Back in those days, we were also certified as an advanced EMT, but we were also EMD certified as well. There were 3 PSAP centers in the county during that time frame. You had the primary PSAP center for the county was at EMS, and then you had the primary PSAP center for the city was at the Longburg Police Department, and then the fire departments had dispatchers as well. So that you better understand how things worked back then, if you lived outside the city limits in the county and you dialed 911 off of a landline, or if you dialed 911 using a cell phone, it came to EMS. And if you needed EMS, obviously you were at the right place. But if you needed fire department, or if you needed law enforcement, then we would transfer you to that respected agency. Now, back then, that was the way it was. Okay, there was no other model. But in today's world, we see how much of a delay that causes. Okay, if you lived in the city limits of Laurinburg and dialed 911 off of a landline, you went to the Lawrenceburg Police Department. If you needed EMS, they would transfer you to us. If you needed fire department, they would transfer you to the fire department. Okay, so that was the structure. That's how the 911 system was developed whenever 911 was created in North Carolina and in Scotland County. I talked about that we handled all the convalescent transports and doctor's offices during that time frame. And it was required that we lived in the county back then, okay? If you wanted a job at Scotland County EMS, you had to live in the county. The reason for that is because we pull call, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But it was a requirement that we had to pull call back then. And it's important to know that the North Carolina Office of EMS is the governing body for all EMS services in the state of North Carolina, okay? So we are governed by them. We had the rules, regulations, general statutes, as well as protocols that had to be approved by the North Carolina Office of EMS. So if you look down at our next slide here, back then, up until we changed over our work schedule, we worked what they call a modified 24/48 work schedule. Okay. So basically, we work 24-hour shifts, and I'll just real quickly go through a model so you can kind of have an understanding exactly how we worked. If you look on the 4th, up on the Wednesday, I'm going to start with B shift. So B shift would work a 24-hour shift. They would get off at 8 o'clock in the morning of the 5th, and then they would be off Thursday, Friday, and right back on Saturday. They would be off Sunday and right back on shift on Monday. And then they would get off on the 10th that morning, and then they would be off the 10th, 11th, and then they would work the 12th. And then as you see, the rotation would continue. But what you see in red is the call schedule. So remember, we used to have to pull call back then. That's why we had to live in the county. So if you go back to the 4th and B shift was working, then when we got off that morning on the 5th at 4 o'clock, 2 folks went on call, okay? So 8 hours later, 7 hours later, now we got 2 folks that are on call, and they're on call for the remainder of the night into the next morning. So in theory, they got a day and a half off after working a 24-hour shift, okay? Before they were right back at work again. Now back then, it worked. That model worked, okay? It did, it worked back then. But as time went along, okay, Miss Dorothy, as time went along, we started noticing changes. And before I get to that, so in 2015 is when we consolidated, the county consolidated with the new 911 and EOC center. Okay. No, when I think you would.
When I was
Okay.
enlarge it for you.
So that was a very exciting time in Scotland County whenever we consolidated. Because remember, you know, depending on where you were at in the county, as I mentioned just a few PowerPoints before, you know, there were all these hoops you had to go through to get what you needed. Once we consolidated, then all 100% of 911 calls came to one location. Okay? And then those telecommunicators could dispatch whoever the caller needed. There was no more transferring here, transferring to this agency. That was delaying response of getting the resources to our citizens. So this was huge for Scotland County back in 2015 whenever this happened. So now let's fast forward to 2016. We're starting to run our data, and we had already started noticing a year or so prior that our call volume is increasing. Okay, so remember in the 90s we were at 4,000. Now in 2016 we are now increased to over 6,000 calls. Okay, now those are just 911 calls. We were no longer doing convalescent transports. We were no longer doing out-of-town transports to rehab centers. We were no longer doing those critical care transports from the emergency room to these level 1 trauma centers because our call volume was increasing to the point that we could not handle that type of response or that type of call volume. Because anytime you would go out of town to Duke or Chapel Hill, that ambulance was out of service for 5 hours. Okay, for that complete turnaround time of 5 hours.
So Robert,
Yes.
let's talk about the 6,000 calls.
Mm-hmm.
So that 6,000 calls to the EMS center, how many of those result in a response? by an ambulance?
100% of them.
6,000.
Mhm.
So if someone calls 911 for law enforcement, there's still an ambulance response.
No, that's not correct. No. That's just 6,000 EMS calls.
Okay, so 6,000 calls requiring
An
an
ambulance.
ambulance to roll. So it's 100% of those calls, an ambulance rolls.
That's 6,000, yes. Now, that's not total calls coming into the 911 center. No, that number's way higher.
Okay, but again, 100% of EMS calls, an ambulance rolls.
Absolutely. If 911 is called, if someone calls 911 and they request an ambulance, 100% of the time, we send one.
And that's annual,
At this point in time, that was annually.
in 16.
Yes. Mhm. Because we cannot deny
Yeah,
services.
and I'm not looking for that. I guess I'm just trying to make sure I understand the impact of the number.
Mhm. No, so 6,000 calls, that's how many 911 response calls Scotland County EMS responded to in 2016.
And in 2024, what's that number?
Almost 8.
Okay.
So we'll get there, but we're steady increasing, okay?
You gotta get there quick, because we gotta be done by 12.
No, that's okay. I'm telling you, I'm about done. So in 2016, our call volume increased to 6,000. Now, keep in mind, we had Braveheart, which is a convalescent service here, and we had, at the time, First Health had an ambulance for the first 12 hours that we were constantly having to call for mutual aid because calls were stacking up, backing up on us. So keep in mind, and two, we're still operating under that 24/48 model as far as the work schedule. Okay, Mr. Arthur, I'm ready. So, also as we have progressed, we've been able to increase equipment, okay? And we also started noticing that we were getting increase in fatigue, began becoming noticeable within the department because our call volumes are increasing. So, and we're still at that 24/48 work model. Our folks were not getting downtime, okay? They're working 24 hours. They're up mostly 24 hours. And in a day and a half, they're right back at work to just repeat that cycle all over again. And if it was on the weekend, you would work Friday for 24, you would get off, and then you're right back at work on Sunday, okay? And keep it in mind, I mean,
But on those 24 hours that they're working, I mean, are they up the whole 24 hours just sitting there waiting on a call, or they
No.
get sleep, or?
No, they do have the capabilities of sleeping, provided they're not on a call.
Right.
So you gotta keep in mind, we're working 24 hours. If the average turnaround time to run a call is about an hour and a half,
I mean,
almost 2 hours.
so what's the average of calls in the middle of the night?
I don't have that number before me. I can get you that information.
But most of the time they get a lot of sleep.
No,
They don't get no sleep too.
no, I'm not gonna say they don't get any sleep, but the amount of sleep was becoming less and less and less, okay? Because there was a point in time, Commissioner, where we were just as busy at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or at 2 o'clock in the morning as we were at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? So medics were getting less and less downtime and becoming harder to keep up with the call volume. So in 2021, we added a 4th truck to try to help offset that, okay? So, and two, we were starting to lose staff because of multiple things. The main thing was the work schedule, okay? Folks that were coming into workforce during this time had no interest whatsoever in working that modified 24/48 work schedule. And that was an issue not just in Scotland County, but across the state, okay? So, and so we were having trouble, being able to recruit quality paramedics. But we, at the same time, we didn't give up because we still had opportunities to improve in our department, okay? So that was also important for me, is that we've got to keep doing the very best we can. So we were able to upgrade a lot of our equipment. All right, Mr. Arthur. So fiscal year 22-23, that's whenever we were able to go ahead and make that transition over to the new 24/72 work schedule. I spent many months traveling across the state, meeting with other EMS services that had already made this transition, okay? This was becoming the new model in the EMS world. This was done due to the volume is now reaching close to 8,000 calls, 911 calls, and as well as this was going to help with retention and recruiting. Okay. We polled the staff to see how they felt about the 24/72 work schedule, and 70% of my full-time staff voted in favor that they would support that 24/72 work schedule. So, it allowed for a more time off and a better work-life balance, okay? And that was very important to me. Again, I spent months going to multiple EMS services to learn about this model, to learn how they made that transition, what were the pros and what were the cons. And so when we went through this, my proposal was not to do all this at one time, okay, because obviously now we're going to have to increase staffing to be able to support this model. So we did this over a 3-year cycle. Okay, Ms. Dorothy. So here you will see, this is the organizational chart, current organizational chart for EMS, just for your knowledge on how we are currently structured. Again, this is just for informational purposes for you to have, so that you know exactly how Scotland EMS is structured, and I'll be more than happy to explain or answer any question on why we are structured the way we are. All right, Ms. Dorothy.
Robert, can I pause you right there, because I think it's important you do just that.
Okay.
Will you, maybe I can explain what I'm trying to say. So you're running 4 ambulances
Yes.
per shift. So can you quickly explain what that looks like?
Okay.
Which of these are part-time paramedics?
So we have a shift supervisor per shift, all right, and then we start with 1 truck, 2 trucks, 3 trucks, okay, and then the 4th truck we run that with our part-time staff. That was the model, okay. That when we did this transition, this is the best way that we came up with how to be able to work the 24/72 work schedule. And granted, we had to get creative with this in order to make it work. So our FTOs, they make up a truck, but we give them additional responsibilities. So when we hire new folks, and they go through the training officer or our deputy chief, once he does his part of it, then they go to the FTO, and the FTO does all of the real-time training for our new hires. Okay, making sure that they're signed off on their driving, make sure that they are proficient on IVs, intubations, things of that nature. So the FTO spends a lot of time working with the deputy chief when it comes to training all of our new employees.
And I think what I wanted to make sure you all understood is when we implemented this model, we didn't implement enough staff to do this model. It's depending on part-time staff every shift, which
So
is
did we
throwing our cost.
Did we eliminate call?
Calls
Yes.
eliminated years
Yes.
back. Yes.
Okay, so there is no on-call.
There is no on-call at
If
this point.
somebody's out of work, does that 4th ambulance pick up the slack and you're at 3?
If we cannot find staffing to come in to replace the people who are out, then yes, the
If
answer
you
is
don't
yes.
have on-call, how do you find staffing?
That's where we have part-time employees.
Okay, where are they on?
That would be your 4th truck. So we will staff our 4th truck with part-time employees, but we have a list of part-time staff within our organization, okay?
Okay,
So you're running 4 ambulances every shift though?
That is the goal, yes. When we are
Okay.
fully staffed, yes.
Okay, how often does that happen? I mean, where all 4 ambulances are out at once?
Quite a bit.
Okay, I'm just asking, I don't know.
Quite a
I'll
bit,
tell you
yes,
what,
sir.
that would be good to see, to help us
Mhm.
wrap our minds around utilization. Because as the county manager pointed out, this is, you can lose control of this pretty quickly.
When you
I
say
mean,
lose
with cost.
control.
With cost.
So, keep in mind, one of the trucks here, one of these 4 trucks also is assigned to the northern part of the county. Okay, remember, we have our ambulance in Wayman, that's one of those 4 trucks.
So they're sitting there and waiting.
They're sitting there to cover and to provide the medical coverage for the northern part of the county. Now, so what does that mean? That leaves 3 ambulances sitting at the base handling calls. When all 3 trucks, when all 3 ambulances get tied up on calls, then we have a model to where the 4th truck will transition down to the halfway point, which is McIntosh Road and 401, where the old store that burnt, and that's where they will stage until ambulances free up, and then they'll go back.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get the life and death nature of this, you know, because nobody wants to have an inadequate response when the situation is required. You know, it's just wrapping our mind around what it takes
So,
to do this. I mean,
so I have, and you gotta talk slow.
Sure.
Okay. So, your 4th ambulance is run by volunteers,
No, part-time.
or part-time,
Correct.
but they're working 24-hour shift.
They may not. Our part-time staff may do 12 hours, they may do 24. It depends on their availability and what they are able to do.
Okay, so, and I'm not here to argue.
No,
but
I'm
I just-
here- I'm here to
I
answer
just-
your
I just-
questions.
I just asked you though, so the 4th ambulance is running 24 hours a day.
That is correct.
So you're saying that for 12 hours you got, part-time, so then do you switch out part-time for the next 12 hours?
Very well may, if they're not available.
But
So-
what about if they're not available?
But then we go down to 3 trucks if we don't have the staffing.
Okay.
Now, I think
and
it's
you
important
don't
to note,
control If you now, and Monty, you'll have to help me here, but I think once you get over 32 hours
That's where I'm going with
and
this.
you're working a certain number of weeks or during a pay period, that person becomes a full-time employee
That's
with
where I'm going
benefits.
with this.
so it's
So-
important.
You can.
Are we-
No, you're correct.
Are we better off having quasi full-time employees and calling them part-timers?
So,
So what, maybe, this is how I envision this, and I'm a layman because Robert's the expert. But what I have pieced together, here's your O chart, and you have 2 more paramedics right here. They're not full-time, and Robert has to piecemeal them together for every shift with part-time people, whether they come in for a 24-hour shift or they come in for a 12-hour shift. And to your point, Mr. O'Neill, if we're not careful with how we're doing this and how we're working our part-time staff, it can quickly get off the rails. We can have to start paying for health insurance coverage,
That's
which means it
in what
locks
where I
us
was going with
which
that.
means it locks us into an extra $10,000 a year for the part-time people that take it. I think last year we had 2 or 3 that said, yeah, I want that health insurance.
I'm sure.
That was an extra $10,000 that we didn't budget for. And then these part-time people, if they go over so many hours, they're getting overtime pay on top of part-time pay. So we do have to be very careful how these are managed. I think is just
And I
so
something.
one of the things
I
that
think
we,
we need to look at those numbers because I think there may be a case against part-time for full-time by the time you pay the bills and do the budget.
so there was 2 things, Commissioner O'Neill, that I think is important that I bring up. Number one, when we moved to this model, we were able to fill 100% of the full-time positions that it took for this to work. Okay, immediately, within 6 months, I was fully staffed. Okay, but what has happened over time is we need part-time. Every ambulance service in the nation has part-time employees. It's better for me to have 30 part-time employees. It's better for me to have 40 because it doesn't cost the county a dime to have them until they work versus having 10.
Well, I tell you, until we see your absenteeism numbers and understand how often you're bringing them in, because if you have 30 part-timers that you've turned into 25 full-timers, that's huge.
No, you're right, but what I'm saying.
But I'm saying we need to see
If
numbers
I have,
on
if I
that.
have 30 part-time employees, now I can say, okay, this part-time is only gonna work X number of hours, this part-time can only work, and we've got 30 to choose from.
Well, I'd like to see the management of that because that's where the budget impact is, because if you have 30 and you end up with 25 full-timers, that is a huge.
Oh, absolutely, and that's not happening. I don't have 25 full-time, part-time employees.
Okay, but I'm just saying,
But it could easily turn into that.
I've already got those numbers.
What does it look
on
like?
a spreadsheet. Best I can remember, EMS had, I'm gonna say 5, 6 people who got we had some part-time people making,
more than full-time people.
yeah,
But that,
because of the hours, and I think we offered 3, we had to offer, Monty helped me, between, I think, 7 and 8 health insurance, but only like 3 accepted, thank goodness.
so I guess
That
that
can
goes
be
back to what Ed's saying, we have to monitor.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and trust me when I tell you, we are doing our very best to monitor.
You got that spreadsheet now that you use.
Yes, so we are monitoring the very best we can.
Can you monitor in the munis?
Yes, that's what
Okay,
my report.
monitor.
Well, there's a
that's where my
spreadsheet.
He's
report
got a
comes from.
spreadsheet that we created for him to.
So.
But it's even easier than what Monty's talking about. Munis can spit us out a report any
All right.
second that tells us.
So our goal here is, you know, we trying to recruit, we're trying to get more part-time folks in here, and we're trying to recruit full-time folks and get them in here, okay? We're doing our very best to be able to recruit as best that we can, okay? Because we do have openings, just like every other department in the county, all right? And, you know, trying to recruit to get good quality folks in is tough right now. You know, just like it is for every other department. Mr. Duffy, I'm ready, unless y'all have any other questions. Can't remember what the next slides are.
Things we do well
Yeah, which I think,
is what your next
for the
slide
sake
is.
of time.
There you go, I got it right here. Mr. Duffy, it won't take me but a second to go over this. So things that we do well, we have a very robust protocol system, okay? So we provide very good care to our citizens, okay? We have a medical director that supports us 110%, Dr. Netta Rostick. You may or may not know him. But he is very, very supportive of what we do. Our medics are required to keep continuing education, 144 hours in 4 years in order for us to recertify every 4 years. We do a really good job on let's see, we average 6 to 8 years. Most EMS services average around 6 to 8 years before they begin looking at vehicle replacements and whatnot. And right now, our oldest ambulance in the fleet is 10 years old. Okay, so I take pride in the fact that we do our very best to keep our vehicles and keep our equipment in tip-top shape as long as we possibly can. We do a lot of things. You were looking at your EMS director. You were also looking at your emergency management director. You were also looking at your medical examiner in the county. You were also looking at your fire marshal, because we don't have one yet in the county. So I assume a lot of those responsibilities. So I say all that to say this: we do wear a lot of hats within our agency, and we do a good job at what we do. Okay, I'm very proud of my department. There's some of y'all in here who have dealings with us firsthand. Now, I'm gonna pick on Commissioner McFadden. All right, Commissioner McFadden has, I hope he will support me when I tell you the services that we provide. Not just on the EMS side, but also on the medical examiner side. Commissioner Williams, as police chief, I think you can agree with me that we provide good services in this community. We do a very good job, okay? And I give all that to my staff, not me, to my staff, and the hard work that they do. Okay, they're very dedicated people. We also got a lot of equipment off of grants, okay? At little to no cost to the county. We created our First Responder Association, which is something that we're very proud of, and that is actually something that's being modeled across the state right now. And that allows us to be able to get equipment so that we can better serve our citizens. You may be familiar with the Duke Cares Registry program that we are a part of. Okay, As a result of that and the good work that we do, we were able to get 16 defibrillators to put in this county absolutely free. Free. 16. We've got them all over the county. We've got them at the parks. Got one at McDuffie Square. We strategically placed them, all across the county, and all of our county buildings have them as well. So we do a lot for the community. We're very proud of what we do, and we're not done. Okay, we're not done. My vision is far. Okay, and I know we will get there.